Hi guys, I will continue the series now, or I will start the series here, because for thousands of years humans have looked at gods as an explanation for natural occurrences that they could not comprehend. They tried different gods, different types of gods, and entire families of gods. And the last few, thousands of years have brought about gods which were popular because they were less human, described in books with nice and, maybe not so nice stories which adorned them with impressive superpowers. And these books were taken as roadmaps for all humans to ensure an afterlife of sorts, defined by their favorite god in their favorite book. One such book is the Quran, a book declared holy, glorious, and noble by its followers, the Muslims, who submit to this their God they call the one and only. Well, as every religious group does. But because the Quran is so vague and ambiguous, different interpretations have led to different groupings within Islam, the political ideology, meaning submission, not an absence of violence, as is so often claimed. And this absence of violence, I've explained that in my violence video, but we usually call this peace. But it's not the peace that Muslims are talking about, because the Islamic peace is the communal submission to their God. So don't be fooled by their term peace, which Muslims love using. Who has not heard the claims made by Muslims that the Quran must be read in Quranic Arabic, and is of divine origin, and thus inerrant, flawless, without any inaccuracies or confusion? From where do they get these arrogant, crazy, obnoxious, irrational, conceited, pretentious, egotistical, and outright silly notions? Is there any reason for followers of the Quran to voice this opinion? Or is this based in plain delusion and brainwashing? So, have there really been no errors, flaws, inaccuracies, or confusing statements been found in the last, 1,000 years, which could possibly be found documented today in the networks of the 21st century? Well, of course they have. And still, there are Muslims who deny this and prefer ignoring a fact-based reality, withdrawing into their personal little protection bubble. And this behavior is then praised and boosted by people touring the planet, lying to their fellow Muslims and deceiving them, telling the Muslims their silly, recalcitrant behavior and their irrational decisions are in fact correct, rational, and perfectly reasonable. They're also taught that if something is wrong with the text or the interpretation, it's always the other person's fault, never your own or the text itself. God forbid. To make matters worse, non-believers like myself are threatened with the eternal torture in the place we don't believe exists. Way to go. So, in the business world, the real world, when I try and show people what the truth is and what reality is like in their company, by analyzing a situation, subsequently describing it using hard facts, I am not always popular. This is even more true in the religious world, which does not consist of facts at all, and does not even like facts, but prefers blissful ignorance and blind faith. Now, in the previous part, the Atheist Introduction to Islam, I explained how I see Islam, how and why it is a political ideology, what kind of God the Islamic God is, and what the general claims are, which are made in the book describing it, the Quran. So, what will happen if I apply the approach I take in the business world when, if I'm reading a legal text and apply it to a religious text? The Quran is, after all, a kind of a contract or covenant, promising certain amenities for the contractually stipulated delivery of compliance with the whims of an invisible supernatural being, insinuating and hinting at desired behavioral patterns, rituals, and performances. This contract also, in all fairness, describes the stiff non-compliance penalties. But is the contract wording so clear that every person reading the text actually knows and understands the offer and what they are letting themselves in for when accepting this contract with its possibly life-threatening fine print? Are any contractual obligations for either party specified? Does it clearly describe who is required to perform what and by when and with what consequence? Just like the claim is made that there are no errors in the Quran, I also hear constantly that the Quran was obviously not originally written by humans and must be of divine origin. After all, in the Quran, a God herself or himself, claims it is flawless, clear, explained, easy to understand and remember. Is this really true? Can the Quran be easily understood? Is it clear and without a single flaw? Now, another claim is that it's never been copied, that it is so different that it's unique, inimitable. The most hilarious explanation and justification for this claim, because there's only one Quran. Now, I simply call this human creativity, which makes every book, painting, composition, or any piece of art for that matter, unique. So, what I'm going to do is I will look at the claim, the so-called challenge, in my journey through the Quran in the bits. So the Quran is used as a basis for millions of people for an ideology the likes of which I've not seen since communism broke down in the 80s. The same goes for the Islamic propaganda machine, which resembles the marketing attempts by communists. And right at the top of all the marketing messages, we need to turn to the Quran, because all Muslim apologists I've come across so far make similar claims. And these two claims are right at the top of the list. There are no mistakes in the Quran. The Quran is obviously and demonstrably of divine origins. Now, to see whether any claim by Muslims is justified, let me read the text known as the Quran, the recitation. And then I will describe what I, a skeptic, rationalist and analyst, see and understand when looking at the words and sentences. Now, please remember that an atheist is merely someone who does not share the claims of believers, who believe that there is evidence for the existence of a God, preferably their favorite God. So the atheist lacks a belief, and that's all. No rejection, hatred, denial of a God, just not believing something based on blind faith. There's no ideology, no dogma, and no other commonalities. So what I'll do is I'll just read the text, all right? Me as the person, not me as the atheist, me as the person. And I will provide my understanding and then let you decide what you think about this. So when I read this, you can decide whether this text is what you would expect a God to write, to provide proper guidance for his followers and ensure the salvation for his creation. And just to recap and to make this really, really clear, this is a God speaking to its creation. This is a God, a supernatural being, sending its own personal words and message in order to ensure its creation receives the best possible guidance on their straight path to heaven, to the afterlife. Okay, so let's get cracking. I'll read the entire first chapter, like sentence by sentence, and then decide whether I'll go through the entire text and create 6,500 short videos, or only focus on select ones, or whether I'll just treat them separately or bundle them. I'll just play it by ear. So here we go with this video, where I will analyze in the Quran, chapter 1, sentence 1. Now it says, depending on, well, there's different translations here. The name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the beneficent, the merciful, entirely merciful, especially merciful, and so on and on. I think you get the picture. Oh, and this is an example if you have like 40 different translations. But let me find some definitions before we proceed any further. Now, Islam means submission, right? Quran is the recitation. Salam means peace. So salam alaikum means peace with you, okay? Now, Allah is the Arabic word for God, for any God, used by Arab Christians or anyone talking about a God in the Arabic language. Gracious means exhibiting courtesy and politeness, characterized by kindness and warm courtesy, especially of a king towards his subjects. Beneficent, doing or producing good, especially performing acts of kindness and charity. Mercy means compassion or forbearance shown especially to an offender or to one subject to one's power. So first off, we can easily see that the translators don't always translate. They leave stuff out, amend stuff, add what they think it should say or ought to say. They are also too lazy to translate the word Allah into God, which is why you will constantly find this Arabic word even in the English translation. A huge mistake in my eyes, as I would not call it a translation if you leave half the stuff untranslated, do you? But let's move on to the content. So, in the name of Allah means that A, the God in this book is being implored in His name, and B, the God is not doing it in, itself. So, like in the name of King Waldo, all subjects are required to be at home when the sun is 2 fingers below the horizon. Now, this is what a town crier might have shouted a few centuries ago. He is using the authority of that king by the name of Waldo. What name does the Islamic Allah, the God, have? Is Allah a name or a function? Is Allah the word for God in Arabic? Yes. So, whose name is the Quran imploring? I mean, you get the schemer, the warner, and all the other so-called names of Allah, which are qualifiers, descriptions, or attributes, not names. So using in the name of Allah and invoking something in the name of Allah is nonsensical, because Allah is not a name. It's a function. And is the God being implored here a human or an entity not existent in this time-space continuum? If this God exists outside our reality, it can't be implored in its name, here and now on earth, can it? If it is not used as in the name of the people, for example, it requires an authority by naming it, not a function. If anyone uses this borrowed authority of another person, it is never the person doing so. So if I go to someone and say, the boss wants us to work longer hours, I am the one delivering a command instead of the boss doing it himself. So it can't be the boss himself saying this. Now, how does that make any sense? The Quran is said to be the result of what a God dictated to someone. This is a God speaking. So we have this God saying, in my name, I decree I am blah, 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 and so on. Reading it literally, we get, in the name of me, the bestest, kindest. Seriously? I mean, some Muslims claim that the first chapter in the Quran merely serves ritualistic purposes, and that the entire chapter was not intended as a normal chapter, but, a bit like a preamble. Excuse me? Where does it say this? Wouldn't a God be able to explain something? Shouldn't a God explain this? I mean, this book is the instruction manual for eternity. This book is what decides on the fate of a person forever. Shouldn't it be clear and very, extremely precise on what the deliverables and conditions are? The point is, does it make any sense for a God to invoke himself to himself as himself? No. I mean, this is not only the case here, but in other places in the Quran, such like 96:1, where this God also somehow falls out of character and says, recite in the name of me who created blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, also, unless someone accepts that there is a super God who has several gods under him who are all in charge of a or one of the universes and therefore have competitions, which makes the God of our universe the best of the creators, that's what it says in the Quran, by the way, because other universes are even worse than ours, this entire sentence makes little sense. So only if you have the super God, then this can somehow fit in there. But how does this make any sense if there's only one God? Let me just go to the second part of the sentence. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Gracious, the All-Merciful. So if this God is merciful, it follows that the judgment of sinners will be seen with some understanding, some compassion, and somewhat benign. Just to put this into perspective, if a guy in, let's say, Virginia, in the US, kills his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend, rapes and then kills his ex, and he takes the bodies, burns them outside in a forest where he dumps them, covers them with a bit of sand, and what is the harshest punishment a judge in Virginia can hand down? The death penalty, death on the electric chair. Now, if there's only one judge in Virginia, and this judge is just a judge, a just judge, the penalty for this crime is the electric chair. So, a given crime C is awarded punishment P. So different crimes have different levels of P. The more severe the crime, the harsher the punishment. If, however, the judge is even marginally merciful, criminals who theoretically deserve to die on the electric chair, if a just sentence is passed down, experience the judge's mercy and will receive the maximum punishment minus the mercy factor. So death penalty minus a minimal amount of mercy is not a minimal amount of death penalty, but no death penalty. So this effectively renders the electric chair useless, as the maximum penalty can no longer be the death penalty, even if a minute level of mercy is applied. So the electric chair is, well, it's thus obsolete and can be dismantled and recycled as, I don't know, as toasters or heating blankets or whatever. Again, harsh and just judge equals electric chair and death. Merciful judge, not electric chair and not death. Now let's apply this concept to the Islamic God. A just or harsh God can accordingly decide on the maximum punishment. In the case of the Quran, eternal torture in hell. So if I, assign a partner or some other God, or I pray to money or cars or whatever, I go to hell. With only a minimalistic amount of mercy, a God can't realistically punish someone with a little less hell, which, as a consequence of mercy, renders hell useless and obsolete. If, as we see in chapter 1, sentence 1 of the Quran, Allah is indeed a merciful, gracious, beneficent God, why is there still something called hell in the Quran? They're mutually exclusive. So how does that make any sense? Well, that makes 3 logical problems in one small sentence, the very first sentence in the holy, glorious, noble Quran. Conceived, designed, narrated, transmitted, literally and word for word by the Islamic God. And this is reality, this is what I see when reading the Quran objectively. There are no mistakes, inconsistencies, or unclear statements in the Quran. I have heard this so many times. I'd be rich if I would have $1 for every time some deluded follower of the Quranic God mumbled this. And just to clarify, I'm not criticizing the Quran here, okay? Or the entire ideology or the socio-political system of Islam or anything. Just nonsensical claims made by Muslims, by people. I understand what the intention is, by the way. I fully understand what is supposed to be conveyed. But it fails unless you have faith, you're gullible and you're brainwashed. You manage to ignore the reality of what it actually says in the book. So the Quran as a book of spiritual contents is to be taken allegorically, not literally. So the thousands of, even millions of varying interpretations of this text and the thousands of resulting groups demonstrate vividly just how impossible it is to come to a single conclusion when reading the Quran today using a critical mindset. We have to slowly start accepting how ludicrous and preposterous the claims are regarding an inerrant and clear explained Quran. What do you think? Do you think this makes sense? Do you think that this comes from a perfect God? Thank you for your time. Oh, and next time we'll be reading chapter 1, sentence 2. And I promise it will be shorter than this one. See you then.